Well, we have our very own Greg Forbes speaking tonight. He is very well heeled, bachelor's in wildlife and natural resources management from California Polytechnic University, also a master's from there in biological sciences, a PhD from the Department of Zoology and also the Department of Tropical Environmental Studies at James Cook University in Australia. He's a professor of biology at Grand Rapids Community College. He also served as the director of its Science Education Center. He was the education director for the Michigan Evolution Education Initiative, which has since kind of melded into the Institute for Evolution Education, which he is the director of. That group helps teachers do a better job teaching evolution in the classroom. He's also the evolution education specialist for the 4,000-member Michigan Science Teachers Association. In 2004, he was named the College and University Science Teacher of the Year by the Michigan Science Teachers Association. And in 2005, he was named Civil Libertarian of the Year by the Michigan ACLU. He is on the editorial board for Skeptic Magazine. He's also a founding member and a current board member of Michigan Citizens for Science. So please welcome Greg Forbes talking on Evolution Exposed. Would you know it if you saw it?
Thank you very much. How are we doing on the sound? Back in the cheap seats, are we okay? Okay, good. Now think of all the different ways you can open up a talk called Evolution Exposed. And I parlayed through all of those and thought it's best to just leave them in your imagination, okay? And kind of get into what we can broadcast over television. But thank you for coming tonight to discuss this with me. And in fact, this is going to be audience participation tonight. So we're going to see if you guys know your evolution, because this is a great topic. Because I spend a lot of my time, of course, as Jeff said in the introduction, with K-12 teachers, kindergarten through high school teachers and university instructors, talking about how to teach evolution, why it's important in the science classroom. But you know what? It goes way beyond that. It goes way beyond the science classroom. And so many people say, well, you know, why should we worry about teaching evolution? After all, it's just biology, and we can just muster through the biology class, get it passed, not worry about it, because after all, of what value is evolution outside the classroom? It's huge. It's all over. It's the fact is you just don't recognize it when you see it. And that's what we're doing tonight, is to help you recognize it when you see it. Because my challenge to you tonight is to challenge you not to, or think twice before you ever go to a physician that doesn't fully understand and practice evolution. Stay away from your stockbrokers if they don't understand evolutionary theory. Stay away from your politicians, your attorneys, your teachers, pretty much everybody you contact in society. If they don't practice evolutionary theory, maybe not the biological component of it, but danger, Will Robinson, danger. There's kind of a red alert for you. And that's what I'm going to share with you tonight, is just where do we see evolution in our society, even beyond the biological realm? Because it's everywhere. And that's what we're going to be doing tonight, is taking a look at that. But first, a word from our sponsor, okay? We have to say happy birthday to Chuck. I mean, he's looking pretty good for 200 years old, okay? Not bad at all. So, 1809 to 1882, which is kind of interesting. I was just upstairs looking at the history of this house. I mean, Chuck was alive when this house was built, right? This was built in the Civil War. So, he could have been here in this room, okay? I'm doubting that, okay? But I did a couple interviews this weekend with newspapers across the state, and they said, well, if you had to kind of parlay all of Darwin's contributions into, 2 or 3 bullet points, I mean, how has the world changed since, Darwin was here? What are his big contributions? I said, okay, well, let me think about that. Well, one of the things that Darwin did, besides evolutionary theories, he challenged this Victorian orthodoxy, kind of Victorian dogma in science. Because although we want to say that dogma doesn't belong in science, and it doesn't, Victorian science had plenty of dogma. If you weren't on the Victorian science wagon, you weren't in the scientific community. And Darwin, somebody who was never trained in science, understand that. His bachelor's degree was in what? Theology from Cambridge, from Christ Church in Cambridge. He was a theologian. He was never trained in biology. So to try and get credentials to get into the scientific community and then to have an opinion contrary to the scientific dogma of the day was a really, really tough sell. And he was one of those people that was willing to think outside the box, to not get on the bandwagon. In fact, so often we hear people say, even in this evolution debate today, is that we know no biologists want to kind of counter what Darwin said because they'll be expelled from the scientific community. Anybody in science knows, no. Science is not a benign cooperative endeavor. It is a dog-eat-dog endeavor. If you're in science, there's blood in the water and there are dorsal fins all around you. You make your way in science by knocking down the edifice of the current belief system. And that's what Darwin showed us so well how to do. And it's continued ever since. Darwin also developed, without a doubt, the most robust scientific theory science has ever seen. As a colleague of mine says from Indiana University, Craig Nelson, evolutionary theory is as good as great science gets. It doesn't get any better. Each summer I teach a National Science Foundation course for university professors, and I challenge them at the beginning of the week. And these are people with postdocs in physics and geology and astrobiology. And I say, I'm going to challenge you. By the end of the week, tell me if you have a theory in your particular scientific discipline that's more robust, that's more well-founded, that's more predictive than evolutionary theory. I challenge you. By midweek, they're tucking tail. And they're going, you've got it. This is as good as it gets. And Darwin didn't just produce this and set on his haunches after that. But also, Darwin forever changed the way that we look at our world and our existence. And he understood that. He understood the consequences of his theory. In fact, for the first 15 to 20 years, he only discussed it with his wife, which was his first cousin, with his brother, and with a couple close colleagues. In fact, many of you know his famous quote, discussing evolutionary theory was like confessing a what? A murder, like confessing a murder. He understood the ramifications of how this theory was going to change the way that we look at our existence and the way that we look at our world. So these things were incredible contributions that Darwin gave us, but also he gave us something maybe even more important. He made receding hairlines look cool, okay? And I'm okay with that, so way to go, Chuck, okay? So what are we doing tonight, okay? So what we're going to do here is take a look at evolution all around us. And before we do that, just one last little note here of Darwin's career. People think, well, okay, he wrote Origin of Species and then he went on vacation. He went to the house and he just kind of relaxed. No, look at this. These are all of his publications, and I've highlighted in yellow some of the big hits. And his first publication, The Voyage of the Beagle, sold out. It made him a household name. It was a popular naturalist at large kind of narration, and the public loved it. And this is where he came to public light. And then Structure and Distribution of Coral Reefs, a lot of people don't know about. My doctoral research is in marine biology. This was kind of the Bible for the field. I mean, he did worms, he did fungus. This is a Renaissance kind of guy, okay? So really pretty important. So what are we going to do tonight? We're going to take a look, first of all, how we define evolution. Before we can talk about is it all around us, we have to figure out, well, what the heck is evolution? And then we're going to find out about the how and why of science. How does evolution fit into this whole scheme of how we approach the world around us? And then we're going to find out, you know what? The evolution is, in fact, all around us. I'll give you some general introductions to how in all fields of science we look at evolution, not just in biology, but in all fields of science. Then we're going to take a look at some applications of evolutionary theory. And it's going to be a mere sampling. We could do this for hours and hours and hours, but we're just going to look at a mere sampling to have you get an idea of just how pervasive it really is in our society. And then we'll take a look at a couple wrap-up details there at the end. But first of all, let's take a look at how is evolution defined. Well, if we take a look in the dictionary, we have a non-biological definition that says it's change over time. Now, we wouldn't use that definition in a biology class, but this is in fact the definition of evolution, change over time. But it's non-cyclic. That means seasons change over time, right? But they're predictable, they're cyclic, so we don't go, oops, spring's evolving into summer, okay? That's cyclic, that's not evolution. But if we define evolution, at least initially, as change over time, where do we see evolution in the sciences? Well, let's take a look. Evolution is going to be found all around us. How about in cosmology? Not cosmetology, okay, cosmology, okay, cosmology, the origin and development of the universe. Wait a minute, the origin and continuing development of the universe, isn't that change over time? Is it cyclic? Absolutely not. Folks, what do cosmologists do? They study astroevolution. That's what cosmology is. It's astroevolution. How about chemistry? Do chemicals change over time? Oh, yeah. In fact, I always tell my students, I said, let's close the door before we say this so the chemists up on the top floor don't get big heads and we have to put in wider doors. But virtually everything in biology, before the fin gets bigger, the beak gets longer, the flower gets redder, the pollen goes farther, before any of that happens, the changes have to happen first at what level? The chemical level. Is there chemical evolution? Yes, that's why DNA changes. It's a molecule, isn't it? So before anything can evolve, it has to change at the molecular level first. This is what? Molecular evolution. It's a whole field of biochemistry. That's what they do all day long. How about astronomy? Okay, not astrology, okay? Astronomy, okay? Are the orbits of the planets predictable? Or I should say that. Are they static? Or are they always changing? They're always changing, aren't they? And they're not changing in a cycle. So do we see the orbits of the planets changing? Absolutely. What do? We look at, once again, astroevolution. How about geology? Is the planet static or is it always changing? It's always changing. In another lifetime, I taught geology. I taught geomorphology, the study of of landforms. And anybody who lives next to Mount St. Helens, I come from California, lives on top of the San Andreas Fault, I can guarantee you the world is constantly changing. And that's what the field of geology is, right? It's studying the evolution of what? The Earth. It's yet another scientific field of evolution endeavor. Take a look at meteorology. Is the climate changing? You're allowed to say yes now with this new administration, okay? Yes, okay? We are, in fact, seeing a change in the climate. No matter how far we stick our head in the sand, we know it's changing. The question, of course, is, well, how much of it is human-induced and how much of it is natural? But there's no doubt that it changes. We know that it changes all the time. That's why you can't go mountain climbing in Michigan, right? Because we've been mowed down by glaciers 4 times. Grand Rapids had a glacier 1.5 miles. That's a lot of ice. Okay? That's a lot of ice. So we know the climate's changed. And now look, we're at a balmy 45 degrees. Okay? So we know that the climates change over time. And so what do these meteorologists do? They study the evolution of climate, don't they? How about oceanography? Does it change? Do the oceans change? Absolutely. In fact, my doctoral research, State of California, bless their hearts, was nice enough to pay me to live on an island in the Barrier Reef for 2 years studying sea turtles. And what I was looking at, thank you, taxpayers, okay? And so what I was looking at was how do the breeding cycles of green sea turtles change as a result of El Nino? You know El Nino, this periodic warming of the equatorial waters. We know that when there's an El Nino event, the green sea turtle populations will crash, the reproductive populations will crash the next year. And we're trying to figure out, well, why is that? We understand that as the ocean characteristics change, so do the biological characteristics. So we study the evolution of the ocean's physical systems. How about anthropology? Do we change in our societies at all? Does morality change? Yeah. Okay. Rites of passage, caste systems. Aren't we always seeing changes? I mean, for people in here have been around since, the Devonian, the 60s and before. I mean, has morality changed? Has our society changed at all? Well, absolutely. And so what do sociologists study? The evolution of societies, right? It's an important part of sociology. If sociology did not change, why would we study it? Right? How about politics and economics? See any change in politics? Yeah, okay. Look, I don't know, spin the globe and put your finger, right? It's constantly changing. Luckily, fascist governments, totalitarian governments, communist governments are on the way right now. They're on their way out. But we see this ebb and flow because what do politicians have to study? The evolution of political systems, right? The evolution of political systems. How about religions? Here's a misnomer. Do religions evolve? Well, absolutely, okay? I was raised as a Catholic. I remember no fish on Fridays. Women had to cover their hair, couldn't get divorced, couldn't be cremated. The list went on. None of those hold true anymore. You can not go to church on Friday. You can have your hair uncovered. You can have meat on Fridays. You can get divorced and get cremated all in one day, and it's okay. Okay? Not necessarily in that order. Okay? So how about language? Does language change? Totally. Yeah, okay. It absolutely does. In fact, what's a dictionary? A dictionary is not rules for usage. It's what? It's a record of current usage because they come out every year because language evolves, doesn't it? And how about biology? Is there evolution in biology? Well, sure, we know that. But what's the take-home message? Evolution theory is not just in biology. It's pervasive in all of the sciences. And so what we're going to do then is take a look at what are some examples, in other aspects of society that aren't scientific necessarily. We'll look at some scientific examples. We'll look at some non-scientific examples. But first of all, let's take a look at more of a biological definition of evolution. We're going to describe it here as an inheritable change over time. Not just a change over time, but inheritable. And that's the key. It has to be inheritable. So can you think of a genetic change you can have in your lifetime that isn't inheritable, that you can't pass on to the next generation? Cancer. Cancer. Can you think of any? Well, cancer. Good. Okay, cancer. Yeah, like skin cancer. That's a genetic change. It's a mutation, but can you pass it on to the kidlets? No. Okay? So it has to be inheritable in order to have any effect upon evolution. Now, that is a very brief definition of biological evolution, and here's one that's really too verbose that we're certainly not going to use tonight. This is something we might use in a biology class. The successive changes in allele frequency and composition in a population as regulated by mutation, genetic drift, gene flow, and selection. Huh? Okay? So I tell my students, we'll do this at the end of the semester. Let's just call it an inheritable change over time. So now if we have our arms at least partway around what makes evolution evolution, let's take a look now at the how and why of science. How does that deal then? How do we integrate evolutionary thought and theory into science? Let's take a look at some options here. The how and the why of science. Many times in classes you can say, for instance, let's approach this question with a how. How do birds fly? We can tell you how birds fly by creating pressure differences between the top part of the wing and the lower part of the wing. How do birds sing? By vibrating their vocal cords, their syrinx. How do plants grow towards the light? Cells away from the light bend the plant towards the light. How is it that children resemble their parents? Well, due to genetic inheritance. How is it there are so many species on Earth? How many species on Earth are there? 20 to 40 million, at least. But those questions then can be looked at very differently. Instead of asking how, we ask the same questions with a why. Why do birds fly, right? Not how do birds fly. Why do birds fly? Well, to avoid predators, increase their foraging range. Instead of asking how do birds sing, we ask why do birds sing? And it's a different answer. They sing to attract mates for reproduction. How, or rather why do plants grow towards the light? To maximize their photosynthetic ability. Why is it that children resemble their parents? Because adaptive genes are passed on to the next generation. Why are there so many species on Earth? Due to the adaptive ability of species to diverse habitats. You see the difference here? There's a question in biology could be how things happen versus why things happen. And it's evolutionary theory that addresses the why part, which is far more interesting than the how. I teach anatomy physiology. Anatomy I consider to be physiology foreplay. You kind of have to do it, okay? You have to get through the mundane anatomy to understand the physiology. The physiology is really cool because you can talk about why the physiology is that way, not how. For instance, you don't talk about, why blood clots, or how it clots, but why it clots. Why did that evolve? That's far more interesting. And this is where evolutionary theory comes in. And when we look at science in general, we have to understand, especially as teachers, and also as consumers of science, the science is really more than just a collection of facts, theories, and formulas. And how often do we teach it that way? It's a yawn fest, isn't it? Recite the 4,015 pieces of minutia on exam number 1. Really what we should be doing is looking at science as an inquiry-based method of exploring and understanding our world. And that's the power of evolutionary theory, is understanding how our world operates, not only biologically, but also socially. And that's what we're going to look at here. So what are the goals, then, of evolutionary biology? To understand the history of life on Earth, and we're doing a really good job of that. Why else do we study evolutionary theory? To understand the mechanisms that cause these changes over time. But what's the ultimate goal of all science? The ultimate goal, the fruit, the fodder, the goal of all science is to produce scientific theory. That's why we exist as scientists. That's the whole goal of science, to produce theory. Why? Because scientific theory is predictive. It allows us to anticipate outcomes. If the theory doesn't do that, there's no reason to be doing science. So what we're going to look at tonight, I'm going to have you guys engage with me, is to try and figure out in these examples we're going to talk about why it happens and what will probably occur in the future. So let's take a look at some applications of evolutionary theory. We're going to be looking at environmental conservation applications of theory. We'll be looking at agricultural applications of evolution, pharmaceutical applications of evolution. We'll be looking at understanding human disease. Our ability to understand human disease now is just phenomenally more powerful now that we incorporate evolutionary theory. And folks, you can't get through med school now without taking evolution. All med schools are teaching evolutionary theory. And I challenge you before, if you're going to a doctor that doesn't understand and fully incorporate evolution in their practice, run like the wind because your life is in danger, okay? And I'll give you examples of that. Biotechnology. Do we use evolutionary theory in biotechnology? Well, absolutely, we'll see. Understanding human physiology. Also understanding human behavior. There's a whole field now of psychology called evolutionary psychology. We try and figure out why we do the things we do from an evolutionary perspective, rather than saying, oh, it's just human nature, it's a quirky aspect of human nature. No, there's got to be an evolutionary reason for that. We're also going to take a look here at understanding market dynamics. Does GM fully understand evolutionary theory? I'm thinking no, okay? And food production. Do we need to use evolutionary theory in food production? Oh, absolutely. And understanding the evolution of disease. Do we anticipate the outcome of potential pathogens on our bodies and our population using theory? And then how do we go about treating disease using evolutionary theory? Okay, so let's take a look at a couple examples here. Let's look first of all at the world's most important organism, the sea turtle. Okay, the green sea turtle, just because I spent my life working on them. So let's take a look at the green sea turtle first of all. Let's take you down to a couple different sea turtle populations. Let's take you first of all to Ascension Island. If you don't know where Ascension Island is, here's Ascension Island. It's exactly halfway between South America and Africa. It's the second most remote piece of real estate on the planet. Number one is Hawaii. You can't get it any further from there than in Honolulu. The second farthest from there is here, which begs the question. Why is it that sea turtles in northern South America swim halfway across the Atlantic to lay eggs and then swim back, while there are plenty of turtles nesting in Central America? What, grass is always greener? I mean, before they take off on their swim, they can look over there at Suriname and go, gee, that's a nice place to lay eggs, but I think I'll spend the next couple months swimming across shark-infested waters to go and breed in Ascension Island. We had no clue. Why on earth would they do this? What, just a little quirk of sea turtle biology? But then we go back and we look at the evolution of the Earth. We look at plate tectonics. Why have these animals, this is the longest migration of any reptile, it's about the third longest migration of any animal. It doesn't make sense because they could just breed on the beaches where they come from, but they don't. Let's take you back now. Remember plate tectonics? If we take that west coast of South America, the east coast of South America, the west coast of Africa, we can kind of move them together. Did these turtles wake up on a Monday morning going, I'm thinking I need to migrate. Let's see, what's the farthest place I can swim? No, what happened? If we take you back many generations, their ancestors swam to Ascension Island when it was just over the horizon. But what's happened over the last 180 million years? The Atlantic's become larger, hasn't it? We now understand that they're hardwired. They're innately programmed to make that swim. There is no genetic program that goes, keep swimming to Ascension until it exceeds, let's say, 600 miles, then find another place. They'll continue to do it. And what's interesting, they're at the point now where the majority of the population is no longer making it. They starve to death en route. They can't make it there and back. And so it's a population that's critically endangered. We're thinking, well, how do we manage this population? Can't we persuade them to just go to Belize? Okay? If you understand the evolution, you recognize, no, this is an endangered population. They're hardwired to do this. Maybe now for environmental conservation, we need to spend our money on a different sea turtle population that has a different evolutionary history that might allow us to do that. Let's take a look in Australia, where I worked. Down here on Heron Island, the extreme southern end of the barrier reef. Our sea turtles, we had about 1,200 green sea turtles in our island. When they came to reproduce, now there are sea turtles that nest on Heron Island, but they're not Australian turtles. They swim from New Caledonia across the South Pacific to lay eggs on Heron Island. The Heron Island turtles swim across the South Pacific, waving flippers at the New Caledonian turtles to lay eggs in New Caledonia. What's up with that? Because clearly both areas are good. It doesn't make any sense, does it? Until you bring evolutionary theory into it. If you had a population of turtles that stayed on one island and bred with everybody who was on that island, it'd be like Tennessee, wouldn't it? Okay? I'm going to get email now, aren't I? Okay? I just know, okay? You'd wind up with low genetic flow, right? You'd have inbreeding. Is that a good thing? No, turtles have had this class. They understand, okay? You need to go to the other side. And so our females swim to New Caledonia and say, hey, baby, baby, to the male green sea turtles there. And then their sea turtles come over to the Australians and go, hey, baby, baby. They switch genes, and it's been working out well for millions of years. What does that have to do with evolution and conservation? Because in Australia, it's illegal to... Is that a sign? It's illegal to harvest sea turtles in Australia. So you say, oh, good. If we fully protect them, then they'll be fine forever. Oh, there's a problem. Because they swim to New Caledonia where there are no protections. Does it do you any good to protect your turtles in Australia for 50 years until they're ready to reproduce when they swim over to New Caledonia and get eaten? No. Is that evolutionary history then important in management? Oh, absolutely. And are we okay on the feedback here? Can we?
Yeah, it's not going to show up on the screen.
Okay. Famous last words, okay? Let's take a look here at... Now, let's take a look here at cheetahs. Cheetahs, we look at their historical range, and maybe back in the cheap seats you can't see this, but this lightest color beige right here, this is the historical range of cheetahs. Look at that, folks. All the way from Pakistan, garden capital of the planet right now, all the way over to the tip of South Africa. Their distribution today is this darker red area here are the high-density populations. And in that high density, that's not continuous range. They're little snippets. Take a little felt pen and put a dot there, a dot there, a dot there. Cheetah ranges, because of destruction of habitat, are discrete populations everywhere. So who cares? What does that have to do with evolution? What does it have to do with management? If we do the genotypes of those populations, they're all related within the population in what we call the sibling level. It's as if they were all brothers and sisters. So what does that mean from an evolutionary standpoint? If we try and conserve all of those discrete populations as individual management units, it's not going to work, is it? Because what happens if a disease comes in that any member of that population is susceptible to? What's probably going to happen to the whole population? It'll be destroyed, right? Because we understand the evolution of the genome. If we understand that they all evolved in the same conditions and they're a remnant population, they're at danger. So do we want to manage that population or start moving cheetahs between populations? Class? I know, I get you. Good. Yeah, we want to move in between. So have that knowledge of evolution allows us to hopefully conserve the cheetah. In the absence of that knowledge of how gene pools evolve, we just be going, well, let's just save each one and we'll work on them one at a time and see how they go. They're not going to go well at all. Let's take a look at pharmaceutical development. Application of pharmaceutical development. Let's take a look at this tree on the left here. It's called the Pacific yew. The Pacific yew is a critically endangered species because it occurs in the Pacific coast, Oregon up to Washington, in very unique environments. It's not because we've harvested them. It's not because the habitat's being destroyed. They're like redwood trees. They occupy a very narrow ecological band. So what? Who cares? What's it mean? We extract a chemical from that plant that we make into this drug here called tamoxifen. You recognize it? Tamoxifen is a very potent drug for breast cancer treatment. Tamoxifen, if we can't harvest the tree to get the chemicals because it's endangered, what do we do? Well, if we understand the evolutionary history of this genus, if all members of this genus adapted to pretty much the same environmental conditions, with our knowledge of evolution of gene pools, shouldn't we be able to go and look at other members of the genus and find similar chemical compounds? Yes. And can we? Yes. And we've managed to find species now that are not endangered where we can extract these chemicals and produce this very important drug. In the absence of that knowledge of the evolutionary history of that group of plants, you'd say, oh, well, we're endangered. We can't really benefit from this particular drug. The same is true over here with these frogs called poison arrow frogs. They're from Central America. Incredibly toxic, incredibly toxic. They cause shutdown of nerves and musculature. There are about 175 species. When we first started taking a look at the chemistry of these frogs, we found compounds that were found nowhere else. There's a whole field of biochemistry called natural products chemistry, where you go out, and if you ever saw the Sean Connery movie Medicine Man, okay, basically, I don't know how he managed to get a fully functional gas chromatograph into a treehouse in the middle of the Amazon and get power to it. But that aside, okay, we take these natural things and we put them through these gas chromatographs to see, are there any compounds that we've never seen before? And are they of any value? And we found compounds in here that are very important for heart drugs, Incredibly important. Problem again. The species we found them in are so restricted to habitats we can't harvest those frogs. But if we know the evolutionary history, like with the ewe, can we find related species that should have adapted and evolved in the same environmental conditions and therefore should have a similar chemistry? Yes, and that's what we've been able to do. In the absence of that knowledge, we go, oh, that's too bad, there aren't many frogs, guess we can't harvest that drug. But evolution allows us to look in other places. How about understanding human disease? We take a look at this, and it's too bad we have so much light pollution because I have a really disgusting animation for you over here of mosquitoes. Let's talk malaria and sickle cell anemia. What disease causes malaria? What plasmodium? It's actually a protozoan. It's not the mosquito. The mosquito is the vector. And is it the well-mannered male or the blood-sucking female? It's the blood-sucking female, and here comes another email, okay? So, the males are nectar feeders. They're kind, benevolent, sensitive, compassionate, want to enter long-term relationships. Those characteristics are so common in male animals, okay? So why is it the females are bloodsuckers? You have to feed the eggs, right? Protein for the developing eggs. But when they're transporting the blood, they transport this plasmodium, this protozoan that actually lives inside the hemoglobin molecule of your red blood cell. That's a tiny protozoan. Now, here's what's so cool. Individuals that have the trait for sickle cell anemia have a deformed hemoglobin molecule. It's a mutant hemoglobin molecule. And as a result, the protozoan can't replicate and feed upon it. So if you have the sickle cell trait, can you come down with malaria? No. Chances are you'll live long enough to do what very important Darwinian thing? Reproduce. And is there a chance that trait for sickle cell will be found in your offspring? Yes. And is there also an increased chance that they might live long enough to reproduce? Yes. So what's going to happen to the incidence of the sickle cell gene in the population? Increase, decrease, stay the same? Increase. Take a look at this map right here. Okay. What we have here in the slant hatch marks right here, that's the distribution of individuals in Africa with the sickle cell trait. This color here represents distribution of malaria. You notice they're almost right on top of each other. Because was it a mutation that was selected for with natural selection? Yes, it was. Our understanding of natural selection helps us understand why this disease condition is so pervasive in people of African and Southeastern origin. So when it evolved in its natural habitat, I always say we have to take you from condo to cave. Let's take you from your condominium back to cave days when these things evolved, when humans were more, susceptible to natural selection pressures. In the cave days, if you will, was having the sickle cell trait a positive mutation, a negative mutation, or neutral? It was positive because it let you live long enough to reproduce. Because you died maybe, when this evolved, humans didn't live much past their early 20s, folks. This whole living past 50, 60, 70 is a very recent thing in human history. And a lot of the world still doesn't do it, okay? So, in today's environment, what's sickle cell? Positive, negative, or neutral mutation? It's negative because we're living past the normal life expectation of sickle cell anemia. Because the sickle cells cause organ failure eventually. But that really doesn't matter in an evolutionary perspective because you've already what? You've already reproduced. So now we get it. Now we understand why this is such a pervasive disease from people from that area. In the absence of evolutionary theory, you go, isn't that just curious? Nature works in mysterious ways. We're understanding the mystery with evolutionary theory. Let's take a look at biotechnology applications. Biotechnology. We know about genetically modified foods, GMF, right? Genetically modified crops. It's a big issue right now. Should we be modifying crops? Well, let's take a look. Let's take a look at corn. Pretty valuable right now, isn't it? Well, corn is preyed upon by this little guy right here, which is called the European corn borer. And the European corn borer comes from, take a stab at it, Europe, okay? And we're wondering now, how come when they get here to the States, it's like party time? Nothing's eating them, they reproduce like crazy, and they destroy our corn crops. Well, let's go back to where they came from. Wasn't there some type of predator or some limiting factor that acted upon them back then? Yeah. It was a bacterium. Right down here, Bacillus, this guy right here, there's a family picture. Isn't he cute? Okay? So that's this Bacillus, and it turns out this Bacillus produces a little protein, this little guy right here, which is toxic. That it turns out if this caterpillar eats any plants that have this bacterium on it, it causes hemorrhaging in the caterpillar's gut. Moment of silence. And the poor little guy dies. Oh, here's an idea. Okay, why don't we find the gene that produces that protein in that bacterium splice it into a corn plant genome. So instead of having the bacterium produce it, the corn plant produces the toxin. Then when the little guy chews on our corn here in Iowa, they get a little hemorrhagic surprise. How cool is that? Okay? Now the good news is you don't have to use biocides anymore, right? Because the corn is its own biocide. That's just the background of the story, though. Where does evolution come in? Look at this quote from the EPA, always looking out for your protection. Okay, the Environmental Protection Agency. It says it's in the EPA's interest to prevent or delay resistance development in pests targeted by, they're called BT crops for Bacillus thuringiensis, because it would require a return to chemical insecticides. To the credit, the EPA recognized, well, wait a minute. We really want to make sure that these pests, the caterpillars, don't develop a resistance to this pathogen. Because if they do, will this gene splicing work anymore? No. And you know why they're worried about it? Because evolutionary theory tells us what? Over time, we will have mutations in the caterpillars, and they're not going to be susceptible to this pathogen. So is this gene splice going to work forever? No. It's just, we've just dodged this bullet because we recognize it's the evolutionary arms race. For every defense, there's going to be what? A new offense. We don't think it's going to happen. Evolutionary theory promises it's going to happen. So in these management strategies, we have to what? Have people at the EPA, people at the USDA, knowledgeable and accepting evolutionary theory. Is that a good thing in government? You would think so, okay? You would think so. Here's something interesting. The Department of Agriculture, who maybe doesn't think these things through all the time, you may remember 4 or 5 years ago, these genetically modified crops, by the way, can only be used for silage. You can't use them for human corn consumption. They can only go to cattle and things like that. It wound up in corn products in the taco shells at Taco Bell. The USDA was astonished, absolutely astonished how this could happen. Could it be because you guys are a farm right here, you guys are farmer A, you guys are farmer B. There's a county road between the two of you. They licensed farmer A to grow the BT crops, and you guys were growing human corn. Who would have even contemplated that the pollen from the BT crop would come over, and I'm thinking, breed with you guys and what? Transfer the gene? Who would have thought? Okay? Isn't it good to have people who know about evolutionary theory at the USDA? Wouldn't this be a good idea? I'm thinking, actually have scientists in charge of the government agencies that do science. There's a novel approach. Let's try it. Okay? Understanding human behavior. Can we understand human behavior by looking at evolution? Yeah. Okay? Let's take a look at the brain. There's a region right here called ACC, which is the anterior. It's in the front. Cingulate cortex. This little region right here. Why do we care? Because it doesn't mature in males until, this is going to become a shocker to you women. Turn your pacemaker up, ladies. This is going to be astounding knowledge to you. It doesn't mature in males till about 25 years old. It matures in females at 17 to 18. Let's take a look at automobile insurance. When do guys' automobile insurance decrease? At 25. Because prior to 25, there's a precipitous increase in auto accidents. And at about 23, 24, it levels off, and then it plummets after about 25. Women's auto insurance goes down, depending upon the company, between 19, 20, and 21 years old. Because when you look at the data, and we have over 50 years of it, you see that boys are hell on wheels, literally, from 16 to 25. Women seem to mellow out at about 19, 20. How come? This is the region of the brain that conceptualizes consequence. This is just published 2 years ago, okay? This isn't news to the insurance agencies, but just published in Neuroscience 2 years ago. So here's a female making a left-hand turn, okay? You're late to work. Lady, the young girl's waiting to make a left-hand turn. You go, oh, God, I've got to get to work, got to get to work. Oh, but the traffic's, I think I can make it. I can make the left-hand turn. But if I don't, there could be an accident. Somebody could get hurt. Cars could get damaged. And I'll wind up being late to work anyway. Oh, wait. Here's the 18-year-old boy making the same decision. I think I can make it. Yeah! Bam! Because it's the rest of that thought process. Ladies, think back now. Think of males' participation, once again, conceptualization of consequence, in birth control decisions. Oh, we don't need a condom. It'll be okay. The woman's going, but if it's not okay, the guys don't get past the, because, of course, all blood drains from that brain to the other one, and they're not worried about conceptualization of consequence, okay? So, interesting, but what's the evolutionary history in doing that? Bob, a word from our sponsor first. Let's take you to criminal justice. When we take a look, and this is a study published 2 years ago, with people who are repeat guests of the criminal justice system, they keep coming back and back and back, in doing the brain surveys, we find out that guess which part never matured? The ACC. Folks, what does it take for you to walk into a bank with cameras at 1 in the afternoon and say, give me your money? In the parking lot, did it enter through your mind that there's a chance there might be cameras, somebody might recognize me, there might be an alarm, and I may just not get away with it? No, okay? Because this part hasn't matured, and attorneys love this stuff. It's not my client's fault. The anterior cingulate cortex was not mature. Okay, go ahead. Go do it again. But it's true, right? There's no concept, because what rational person would go and do something like that? Okay, now wait a minute. What's the evolutionary question, though? Why is it we see this in males? From an evolution perspective, why would there be delayed conceptualization of consequence in males, but not females? What's the survival benefit? And by the way, folks, this is why in military we love young males. Charge the machine gun nest. Okay. Okay. I'm glad I was in the military. I would have been court-martialed. Forbes, dig a hole over there. But wouldn't the hole be better over here? And wouldn't a ditch be better than being just like, charge the, okay. We love that stuff, don't we? So why would we see this in evolutionary history of humanity? Why do we want males who don't worry about consequence? Exactly. Okay, a variety of different things is that, first of all, if a male's not worried about consequence and we're looking at breeding, and Dr. Bajma says it all comes down to sex, okay? So if the goal of all life, which is true, is to produce reproductive offspring, because it does you no good to be kind, benevolent, and caring if you don't produce reproductive offspring, because your kindness, your caring, and your benevolence just died out of the gene pool, right? The whole goal is reproduction. Okay? So if you're not worried about consequence, are you more likely to go after females that might be somebody else's? Are you more likely to take those chances that normally, if your anterior cingulate cortex is mature, you might think twice of? Absolutely. Are you more likely to father more offspring then? Yes. Is the gene for delayed maturation of this more likely to become more common in the gene pool? Yes. Who's more likely to go out and find resources? Just take you from condo to cave days, right? So you're thinking, we're out of food. Well, there's a big old mastodon out there. I've got a club, okay? The female's going to say, well, I'm thinking this might not be a good idea, but it just might work for the guy, right? So is there a survival benefit for this delayed maturity? Sure. Nowadays, of course, it causes all kinds of problems in our society because, the woman's mantra of male behavior is growing older but not up. Okay? So, give us a little break here. I mean, it takes a quarter of a century to know that we should put the toilet seat down. Okay? Okay? We can even see the same thing with ADD, attention deficit disorder. And we don't have a whole bunch of time to discuss this one. This is a complicated one. But if we're correct in the percentage of kids with ADD, and we're not, in the United States, folks, it's 1 out of every 5 Caucasian male boys is diagnosed with ADD. In the UK, it's less than 5%. Either they're really bad at diagnosing it, or we're really good at diagnosing it, or the truth lies somewhere in between. But it's a real condition. We know that. So it begs the question, why is it apparently so pervasive in the human genome if it's disadvantageous? Let's take you from condo to cave. Can you think of a reason that ADD might have been maintained in the human gene pool? I have an ADD kid. I don't know where he gets it. Okay, but, I'm thinking, hey, just because I have a Y chromosome doesn't mean I'm not sensitive. Careful. Okay, so why might ADD persist?
Look more often for predators.
There you go. Yeah, and exactly. Once again, it's kind of like adventuring out, okay? I'm cave dad, okay? You're my cave son. The other guys and I are going to go out and look for mastodons today. And I say, we haven't found food anywhere for months and months. We're all getting ready to starve. We're going to go out in the same direction we've gone every day for the last 3 years, and you stay here and take care of the cave moms. And we go out the same old path we've gone every time, and you don't listen to me. You go the other way. Okay? Now, you might find in a tar pit, you might have a saber-toothed cat try and breed you. All kinds of things could happen. But you might also find the berry patch that's been over the hill the entire time, right? If we have enough kids with ADD, is there, and this is not proven, folks, this is the word speculation here. But can you draw an evolutionary model for why it still exists? Yeah. Does ADD have anything to do with the IQ? No. In fact, anybody, we have teachers in here, and you go, oh, you count the first day. How many ADD kids do I have? Okay, and you recognize many times they're just more intelligent, aren't they? Well, how about understanding human behavior as far as mate selection goes? How do we select our mates? Okay? What are the criteria we use? Well, we use two criteria primarily: access to resources and apparent health. I say apparent health because, you know what? When you reproduce with somebody, you're throwing almost literally all of your eggs into one basket, right? Because you think if you're going to be monogamous and have one partner for your entire life, what do you know about them at 20 or 25? It's a genetic black box, isn't it? So you go, oh, honey, I love you. Kissy, huggy, consummate your relationship, have a cigarette. Okay, get a group insurance plan, okay? Now, you produce offspring. Do you have any idea what kind of genetic diseases your spouse is going to have, your partner at 30, 40, 50 years old? No. So you do the best you can, right? You go, you look pretty healthy, so I'm going to reproduce with you. And we don't have time to expand upon that. The other thing we look at is access to resources. I have you pictures of birds here, because you know this red-winged blackbird? You know, the male sits there and goes, 15 hours a day during breeding season. Why? Well, he's saying, hey, look me over, lend me your eggs. What he's doing is saying, I'm healthy, I can sing all day long, and I have these cool colors. I have apparent health. But then he moves around his little wetland all day long, going from perch to perch, singing, saying, if you reproduce with me, this swamp could be all yours. Okay? And why is that good? Because you have resources to raise the offspring. And you can change, well, I'm above that. I don't really do that. Oh, nonsense, okay? And you feel, well, especially women, they come and go, oh, no, I choose my mate based upon sensitivity, caring, and dedication to a long-term relationship. Oh, yeah, sure you do, okay? Yeah, everybody has their criteria, right? You've got the, oh, geez, get away from me, and then you've got the bar at closing time at the other end, okay? So there's a range, right, that you're willing to accept, okay? But it's got to meet your what? Apparent health criteria first. Okay, so let's take a look. So which criterion is the most important to each gender? This has been studied to death by evolutionary psychologists across virtually all cultures. And it holds true for almost all cultures. Women, let's go for guys first. Guys usually select their mates based upon what? Apparent health or access to resources? Apparent health. Women, obviously there are exceptions, we understand this. Women across almost all cultures choose their mate based upon what? Access to resources. Doesn't that make evolutionary sense, though? I mean, really, doesn't it? Because is the male involved in child rearing?
No way.
It speaks volumes, doesn't it? Okay? That explains a lot, okay? So, but if we take you from condo to cave, did the male have to be involved in child rearing? No. So the benefit there was to find as many healthy females most likely to produce offspring with your genes. Does the female have to be involved in child rearing? Yeah. What's she need now? A male who might be able to supply those resources. Right? Makes sense? Okay. So let's take a look at the masculinity index here. Ladies? Okay? You ladies are on the spot here. Okay? Now, if you had to choose with no other knowledge, and I realize it'll be out of the incorrect age group for some people in the room, but if you had to choose one to raise children with, to spend a life with, would it be A or B? Okay, so here are my questions. One, who do you want to raise a family with? Number two, who do you want to have rowdy, dirty sex with? Okay? For the weekend, okay? So who do you want? Who wants to have a family, ladies, with A? I think you're lying to me here. Okay? Who wants to have rowdy, dirty sex with A?
No.
Okay? Who wants to have an affair with B? Who wants to have a family with B? Who are so confused you just want to sample a little of each? Okay? Okay, you guys are lying to me a little bit here. Let's take a look, a classic study here from Nature, where they took Asian males and females and Caucasian males and females, large sample size, put them in front of a computer with morphing software, and said, every time you push the button, this image will morph from female to male based upon a couple characteristics like chin, ears, and other things that are influenced by estrogen. and influenced by testosterone. So if we look, and once again, I'm sorry we have the light pollution in here, but if we look on the left here, we have a more feminine characteristic. On the right, we have a more male characteristic. Let's take a look at another one here. Take a look on the left, the Dookie Howard guy here. Okay, take a look at this guy right here. Versus here it says A1, A2. Which one do you think is more masculine? A1 or A2? A2. Let's look at B1, B2. Who's more masculine? B2. C1, C2? C2. Look what's happened to the length of the chin. Look what's happened to the brow line. Look what's happened to the upper jaw. These are all aspects that are produced by testosterone. They're more male characteristics. The rounded features are more female. Take a look on the right-hand side here. Who's our most masculine, A, B, or C? Once again, hard to see with the light pollution in here. It's C. For the same reason. What they've done is they've morphed the chin, the nose has become more pronounced, the cheeks, and these are all artifacts of testosterone. Now here's what's interesting, is that when this study was done, people were asked which of these individuals, okay, and the morphing software, they were asked to go through the entire sequence from very, very feminine to very male and come up with the one that they think is the most attractive. And in both males and females, they found the more, what, masculine or more feminine characteristics to be desirable in both genders. So, men preferred what in other men? Female, feminine characteristics or male? Feminine. Females found more desirable in other females what? Feminine or masculine? Feminine. Females found in other males, females found in males what? Feminine or masculine characteristics desirable? Feminine. Everybody chose feminine in almost all situations. Now, the question is, well, why? With which type of man are women most likely to have an affair? Let's now take a look at the masculinity index. One that looks very masculine or one that looks more feminine? More masculine. This has been studied to death, okay? In fact, we find out that when the women who did this study do the same test during the ovulation, their preferences change. During ovulation, their preferences go from preferring a feminine male to a really robust masculine male. Why? Why would you, for a life partner, want to choose someone who has more feminine characteristics? Because it's perceived, we've been selected for this, that testosterone makes you what? Kind, considerate, caring, and enduring? No. Estrogen tends to lead towards those. So if you have a male who has the pronounced male characteristics, the square chin, the pronounced cheekbones, the high brow line, they have a lot of testosterone, don't they? Are they more likely to be a good, endearing parent? No. However, are they more likely to father as many children? Let's take you from condo to cave now, right? Let's take you out of the condominium, take you to the cave days. If you father children with this feminine-looking male, you have an issue there. You might have some offspring that are pretty passive males. Are they going to be able to compete with resources with the other aggressive males? Folks, kindness, consideration, and caring gets the male animal nowhere. So if you can have a few offspring with an aggressive male, is there now a better chance that some of your genes will be passed on? Absolutely. We see across all cultures during ovulation, and when chosen who do you want to have the wild, hot sex fling with, it's a more masculine male every time. When you're asked who do you want to raise children with, it's the more feminine male. So, Tom Selleck, or do you want to have the guy in Seinfeld? Who's the bald guy in Seinfeld? George Costanza, okay? With which type of man would a woman want to compete at work? If you're competing with a man at work, ladies, do you want a very masculine-looking man or an effeminate man? Feminine. How come? Better competition. If you have a large aggressive male, right, who has high testosterone levels, is that person going to be aggressive? Have a take no prisoners attitude? And we see this across cultures. We see it in the workplace. This has been studied quite a bit. With which type of man would a man want to compete at work? You want to compete with a Tom Selleck or a George Costanza? George Costanza. Because our behavior is influenced very strongly by the estrogen hormones and the testosterone hormones. And we're seeing this occurring in many, many studies. With what type of man would a man want to compete at work? I think I did that right? Tell me what a man would compete at. Oh, okay. Okay. Let's take a look here. I'll go through these. Let's take a look at understanding human behavior. How about cooperation in primates? Why are we likely to cooperate, right? I mean, hopefully everybody here has helped push somebody out of the snow or something, right? Why? I mean, really, why? Your car's warm. You're on the way to Taco Bell. This guy got himself into the snowbank. It's Darwinian. Let him figure it out. Well, there you go. Let's take a look at our two closest relatives. Chimpanzees on the top right-hand side, which are far more aggressive than bonobos. Bonobos are our most closely linked relatives. Okay, they're two species. Okay, so we have chimpanzees, very aggressive as you can tell, and then we have bonobos. Bonobos, when they have sex, it's long, it's novelty. Somebody did a PhD in this. They've cataloged over 25 positions. Way to go, bonobos. Okay? There's no aggression towards the females. It's a matriarchal society. The females dominate. The males do not murder the females. Chimpanzees take the flip. Copulation lasts about 45 seconds. The female's doing everything she can to get away because there's a chance she could be killed. The males are so aggressive. There's no social structure in the females. There's barely any social structure in the males. Males kill each other. They kill the females. What's up with that? You have to go back and take a look at the evolutionary history. When chimpanzees evolved, they evolved in habitats, we believe, where resources were more scarce. So could you go out as a group and look for resources? No. You went out as a solitary chimpanzee to look for resources. So the females were out by themselves trying to find resources. Bonobos evolved in habitats that were resource plentiful. Could you go out in groups then and hunt? What did the females do while they were hunting? They bonded, didn't they? Males don't bond. It's that whole testosterone thing. Males didn't hunt together. So females established what? A social bond. Males did not because the habitat allowed the evolution of that behavior. Now, bonobo males try and be aggressive towards females. Is that female on her own to protect herself now? She has a couple dozen of her closest girlfriends, doesn't she? It's a matriarchal society. And this is why sex is not potentially deadly in the bonobos like it is in the chimpanzees. This is why, we can see here, it's a very calm environment. Luckily, we evolved from who? I don't mean evolved from, but our closest ancestor are what? The bonobos. Think of our closest ancestor for the chimps. Okay? You think that we're aggressive. Good news is we're more closely related to these. But now we get it, right? If we understand the evolutionary history of our closest living relatives, it makes sense as why we have cooperation. And we don't have time to talk about, some of these other guys, but let's take a look at understanding human physiology through evolutionary theory. We have a surgeon over here on the right. If you do a Google search and put in embryology, over 85% of the papers you'll get will be embryology of the surgeon. You go, we must be really concerned about surgeons. Why? Because they're so cuddly, right? High cuddle factor. Yeah, there's a societal distaste for doing research on human embryos, isn't there? It turns out that we understand the evolutionary history of sea urchins. Sea urchins, believe it or not, have a similar embryology as we do. They're called deuterosomes. Their embryos develop in the very same manner ours do. No other invertebrate does that. And so we study their embryology as a key to what? Understanding ours. If we didn't understand the evolutionary history of sea urchins, we wouldn't have the knowledge of human embryology that we have. But luckily, we understood that evolutionary relationship. How about understanding market dynamics? If you have a successful business, can you afford to continue to market a product in an environment that's no longer favorable to that product? No. If the environment changes, and this is what we say about organisms, if the environment changes and you are no longer adapted to that environment, you better migrate or you're going to die, right? You're going to migrate or die. Go out and try and buy a reel-to-reel encoder. Try and get a Polaroid instant click and shoot. Try and get film. Try and get a Pinto. Sure, there are some people still making these, and they're just making millions of dollars, aren't they? Because as the market changes, it's evolution 101, isn't it? You better understand that you have a market. If the market changes, you better be able to change with the market. Because if you don't evolve to the changing business environment, you become commercially what? Extinct. Think of any examples? Yeah. We don't have bailouts in Japan for the car companies, do we? How were they adapting to the changing business environment? They've had this class, haven't they? They took Evolution 101. In Detroit, for some reason, we'll keep making Humvees and people will keep... Build it and they will buy. Really? Must be a comfortable place, okay? How about in agriculture? We know that we've been using evolution for thousands of years in modifying the crops and the livestock that we consume. And I won't spend much time because we're running out here. But we take a look at, for instance, tomatoes. 7,500 varieties. Wheat. We're looking at all kinds of wheat that come in multiple genetic shapes or conditions. What's called diploid, tetraploid. Some have 2 sets of chromosomes. Some have 4. Some have 6. Some have 8. So what? Who cares? What does it mean? If we understand the evolutionary history of how these forms evolve, we can then also take those and grow them in different climates that are most appropriate. Don't take a wheat that evolved in the Middle East and expect it to grow in Oregon, okay? I'm just thinking it's not going to work. How do we know that? Because we understand that that genome of that wheat evolved in an environment with certain characteristics in certain environment. If we understand evolutionary theory, we recognize where we can move these crops and how we can hybridize them. Let's take a look here, just before we wrap it up here in about 5 minutes, let's take a look at food production. Do we really care about evolution in food production? Let's talk chickens. Okay? Chickens are grown in huge batteries. Anybody from Zealand, if you're from Zealand, okay, you have a couple important characteristics in Zealand. You have huge chicken batteries, and you're also the only community in the United States that banned the Harry Potter books, okay? But other than that, I digress, okay? You go out towards, past Lowell, there's huge chicken batteries. We're growing millions of chickens at once. We don't want disease going through there, so you think, well, we give them antibiotics. That's not what we feed antibiotics to our livestock. We feed antibiotics, in this case, Cipro. We feed Cipro to chickens. How come? It brings them to market weight, 5.4 pounds, 1 day earlier than if you didn't give them antibiotics. You go, come on, it's a day earlier. Folks, if you have 3 million chickens, is a day of not feeding them going to help your profit margin? Absolutely. This is why we use it, okay? Because it brings them to market earlier. So what? Who cares? What's it mean? I don't know if you've ever seen film of how chickens are slaughtered, but eventually they go through this thing called the fecal bath, okay? They go through this wash, because remember, you're pulling out the intestines and doing all this stuff, and they have to be rinsed off. The problem is this isn't bath water, right? This is water that has what's called offal, slaughtering remains in it. So basically what you're doing is you're inoculating them in all the fecal material, right, that came out of the intestines, etc. Well, it turns out we all have bacteria living in our gut, right? Well, the good news is that we give them Cipro. So they should have a squeaky clean gut, right? No bacteria. We understand evolution, don't we? That if we give them Cipro, we're just going to kill the members of that population of bacteria that are what? Susceptible to Cipro. Will we kill all bacteria in their gut? No. Okay, fast forward to the kitchen. We take our chicken, okay, and we cut it up on the cutting board. We put it in the oven and we cook it. That will kill 100% of the bacteria. What's the problem? Well, we drug its little carcass across the counter, didn't we? And then we rinse off the board and we cut our salads on there. What do we just inoculate everything else with? This bacteria. You get this bacteria, and it's potentially deadly, by the way. It's Campylobacter. It's a potentially lethal bacterium. You get Campylobacter. You go, well, don't worry about it because we have an antibiotic that takes care of it. The antibiotic that we give people when they get Campylobacter is what? Cipro. Is it going to help you? No. Well, that's not very smart. In the 1970s, the USDA, luckily at the time had scientists, the USDA said, we cannot have Cipro used or any other antibiotics as growth promoters in livestock. Enter Big Pharma. Big Pharma comes in, goes to the DNA, goes to the USDA, goes to Congress and says, call off the USDA. We don't want any restrictions on use of antibiotics. This is back in the 70s, folks, because they understood evolutionary theory. Fast forward 39 years later, we're still using what? Cipro. When did this come to a head? 2001. Remember the anthrax scares? Guess what we use for anthrax? Cipro. How about the avian flu? A quickie. The avian flu occurs in where? Birds, in wildfowl. Evolutionary theory says if it's in wildfowl, it probably will be mutated to where it can be communicated to domestic fowl. Chickens, ducks, geese. Did that happen? God, just like evolutionary theory would suggest. The next thing we'd say is, well, if it's in warm-blooded birds, evolutionary theory would suggest it'll mutate and get into mammals. Maybe mammals that share the barnyard. Let's say pig. Don't make me do this twice. Pigs, okay? Pigs. Okay? Pigs. And did that happen? Yes, just like evolutionary theory would suggest. Then theory says it should mutate again to get into mammals that are very closely related to pigs physiologically. Humans. Did that happen? Oh, who would have thunk it? Darwin. Okay? Then we say, well, if it's now in humans, the next mutation should be what? From humans to humans. Are we there yet? No. Are we going to get there? Yes. Folks, the 1918 flu was an avian flu. They're the most deadly viruses out there. And that's what killed the millions of people in 1918. So is it good to understand evolution and know that in treating here? You betcha. How about HIV? Two things left, and we'll call it quits here. HIV. Back in the halcyon days of the 90s, we used to tell you, as long as you have... do we have to have you sit in the back again? Okay. As long as you have, quote-unquote, safe sex, you weren't going to get HIV. We now understand safe sex is a wetsuit, a respirator, gloves, a magazine, and a little private time. Okay? You can have safer sex, okay? Because we used to tell you that the only way you can get HIV is blood-to-blood transfer or fluid transfer. Whoops. In fact, HIV sails across perfectly intact membranes because there are receptors on the cells that actually seek out HIV and pull it into the cell, as you see happening over here. You go, whoa, 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 whoa. Why would our cells evolve to take in a deadly pathogen? Well, evolutionary theory says they didn't evolve HIV. HIV has evolved to mimic a protein that the cell needs. When the cell's taking in the HIV, it thinks it's taking in the desirable protein, not deadly HIV. Now we get it. Does that knowledge now allow us to develop some antiviral treatments to maybe hide that receptor? Yes. That's a very important thing, isn't it? Treating disease, pneumonia therapy. About 4 or 5 years ago, I contracted pneumonia for the first time. I get it from my students, okay? I'm always healthy till the first 2 weeks back from summer, and then I get bronchitis because I get diseased by my students, okay? Turned into pneumonia, went to the doctor. He goes, you have pneumonia. Let's give you some erythromycin. Thank you very much. Took my erythromycin. A week to 10 days later, felt better. And then 14 days later, 21 days later, I have pneumonia again. He goes, did you take all the medication? Yes, I did. Well, let's give you another round. Give me another round. Felt better, whatever, 14 days later. 21 days later, I have pneumonia again. Go back in. He goes, let's give you another round. I go, no, let's have a talk about evolution. Please sit down. He was doing his best to kill me, wasn't he? Remember I said, if you have a doctor who doesn't fully understand and practice evolution, run, because your life is in danger. Was the third treatment, the fourth treatment, the fifth treatment of erythromycin going to do anything for me? No, because we had already killed all those bacteria that were susceptible. I got sick again because there was a remnant population that was not susceptible to erythromycin. So let's just said, sit down and let's examine your strategy, okay? So we went to another one, and then he called me, and he goes, how are you doing? Well, I'm doing great. How are you doing in your new drug therapy? Well, thank you. I will, look at this differently in the future. You think? This is why we teach evolution in med school now. Let's finish with HIV. Okay? Here we have HIV. HIV isn't alive. Viruses aren't alive. We don't call them species. We call them, strains or varieties. And so if we didn't have the light pollution, up here you can see that there are a lot of different strains. Let's assume these are HIV in my body. So I have the red strain, the purple strain, the blue strain, different combination. And the light blue strain is probably, only 2 of them in there, so not very common over the whole population. Just like looking out in the room, there are a lot of different humans, right? A lot of different genotypes of humans in here. Same thing in viruses. There are different types occupying my body if I had HIV. So what happens? The good news is we invent the red pill. The red pill is going to take out the red viral strain. Watch what happens when we do that. Okay? Let's go back, actually. Let's go back one here. Okay. So we get the red pill. I take the red pill, and look what happens. Most of the red guys disappear. But do they all disappear? No, because some of them are not susceptible. They're immune to that particular drug. I still have all these other guys. Well, the good news is we come along and we invent the purple pill. I take the purple pill, and luckily it gets rid of what? Most of the purple guys. But all the purple guys? No, most of them. But I'm feeling better each time, right? Because I'm decreasing my overall viral load. So what happens now? The gold pill's invented. Whew. I take the gold pill, and what happens? I get rid of most of the gold guys. So I get rid of all of them? No, because some of them might be immune. The pink pill comes along. I take the pink pill. Look what happens. I get rid of most of the pink guys. Whew. Here's the problem. I really need the blue pill, don't I? But the blue pill hasn't been invented yet. So I have a bit of a problem, don't I? I was getting better all along, right? I was getting better all along because I had medications that came online, which is why we fast track HIV drugs. If I have HIV, do I want a 10-year clinical study to prove to me that it's safe? No. Okay, I won't be around. Give them to me now, I'll take the chance. So these blue guys are here. Uh-oh. Okay, guys, what are you going to do? Think about it first before you answer. You're my doctor. I'm depending on you not to kill me. I've checked you out. I know you understand evolutionary theory. What are you going to do to keep me alive? Think about it. Are you going to maintain my dosage? Are you going to increase the dosage? After all, those drugs kept me alive for years, and now I'm getting sick again. Why not increase the dosage? Or are you going to make me stop taking all drugs?
Stop.
Really? Yes. How many for maintain dosage? It's worked for 5-6 years. Okay? How about increase? If a little is good, a lot must be better. You're going to take me off all drugs. Folks, this is a new drug regime that we've only started in less than 5 years. And it was an evolutionary biologist who said, you know what? We're going about this the wrong way. How come? Remember when we started here? Here was our original population. How common were the blue guys? There were hardly any there. Why were there hardly any there? They were being out-competed by the other strains, weren't they? So since I can't kill them yet, since I don't have a blue pill, take me off all medications, let the other guys come back, and it's going to be months as they start to build up, and yes, I'm going to get progressively more sick, but what's going to happen to the blue guys? They're going to decrease in population, right? Because remember where we were? We had all these guys. Am I ill right now? I need to get rid of those blue guys. So if we allow the other guys to build up, what happens to the blue population? Goes back down. But eventually, aren't I going to get sick again? So what are you going to do now, doctor? Start me on the drugs again. Won't we wind up in the same place? Yes. And what are you going to do again? Take me off until what's invented? The blue pill. HIV treatment around the world. We say, why don't we give people in developing nations the HIV drugs and save them? Let's give them a medication, and we'll catch them again in a couple of years. I have a couple friends that are HIV positive, and I've asked them, I said, in a low year, what's your drug cost? It's about 25 grand. On a big year, what is it? About 40 grand. Do you keep the same drug regime throughout the year? Or are you changing drug regimes all the time? Are you going to keep the same medications for a year? No, because what's happening? Someone who has full-blown AIDS produces 5 billion new viral bodies per day. Are these drugs going to work for me in 2 months? No. You see all the time in ads sometimes, in the personal ads, you say, HIV individual looking for same. If you have HIV, is it okay to have unprotected sex with another HIV person? I mean, you both have HIV.
You're just increasing the HIV gene pool between the two of you.
Exactly. If you understand evolutionary theory, you recognize on a dumb scale of 1 to 10, that's a 25, okay, to do that. Because if I have my HIV a little bit under control with the medications I have, with the population that I have in there, why on earth would I introduce a new genotype into my body? So it's a crazy thing to do if you understand evolutionary theory. Okay? So in conclusion, we say, is it important to teach about evolutionary theory? You can see it's pervasive in our society. It absolutely is. The courts have given us the right to teach evolution. And in Michigan now we have a mandate by the state to teach it. But however, it's the wealth of evidence substantiating evolution that really requires its inclusion in a modern science curriculum. When we see how pervasive evolutionary theory is in all aspects of our society, in law, in the politics, why on earth would we not have our students learn the most significant scientific theory that our civilization has ever seen? Great quote I love from the fruit fly geneticist from Caltech, Dobzhansky: "Nothing in biology even makes sense except in the light of evolution. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of disjunct factoids and formulas that make no overall predictive value." So why study it? Because those who don't study evolution are condemned to repeat it. Thank you, folks, for paying attention.
All right, we'll take a handful of questions and then let you guys finish up the Darwin birthday cake and be on your way.
Hi, Greg. You mentioned Cipro. Is that the only word for it? Is it ciprofloxacin? Or
it is. It's ciprofloxacin.
It is.
Yeah,
okay.
That's the trade name.
Very interesting thing.
Yeah.
I'm a dog breeder. Raised golden retrievers for many years now. One of my dogs was put by one veterinarian on ciprofloxacin for an issue she has. Didn't like things in town, so went to another doctor out of town over in Okemos. And he said, "You're using Cipro?" "Yeah," and I did on another dog that wasn't mine.
And it wasn't successful, probably, right?
He said, "Tell your veterinarian back home. We are putting you on, your dog on another drug, which is working, and hopefully." And he said, "Tell him there is a new formulary out on this that they have discovered that there is less than 40% absorption of the drug Cipro." So, just don't give it to any dogs or any cats, and who knows whether people should have it.
Great. Well, thank you for that. And that's just what we were talking about, is that we recognize that there's going to be evolution, rapid evolution in microbes, especially in viruses. I mean, bacteria and viruses, every time they replicate, every mutation is passed on because there aren't two sets of chromosomes. If we have a mutation, there's always another paternal chromosome that might have the correct gene and override it. That's not the case in viruses and bacteria. Any mutation will be passed on to the next generation. So to think that a drug like Cipro is going to continue to work is an exercise in futility if we understand evolutionary theory.
Species have been dying out on the planet and going extinct since they've been around. And for the tree you mentioned and the frogs, I can see where it'd be in the human interest to keep some of the endangered species alive. But in the case of, say, the cheetah, why not just say, okay, it hasn't adapted fast enough to a changing world and let it die out? What is in our interest to spend all this time and money to conserve species like that?
The question, I think everybody heard that, is that if we go back and look at geologic time, we see that depending on who you read, they always say 99% of all statistics are lies, but 99% of all the species that have ever occurred in the fossil record, including those alive today, are biologically extinct, because extinction is the rule rather than the exception. So the question is, then why should we worry about extinction if it's a natural process? And I think most of you know the answer, because it's anthropogenic extinction. It's human influence that is the concern. We've seen more species go extinct since the Industrial Revolution than the previous about 10 million years of evolutionary history. So if we assume that, yes, it's good to have diversity on the planet, and we recognize that ecologically, then should we do something to conserve it? What we see with the cheetahs is not a natural event. That's because of habitat destruction. What we see with some of these others are not natural events. So if we're willing to say we're okay with the sterile planet of just being humans, then end of discussion. But if we say we recognize the value of other species, especially if you want to be completely selfish, and the genes they may contain for us that may be of benefit, then we do our best to conserve it. So it's the human-induced evolution that becomes the concern.
Yeah, this is kind of a tangent, but before Cipro, they were just feeding lots and lots of tetracycline to chickens and so forth. And so, and then in India, and I don't know how many other places in the world, they use non-steroidals, high doses of Motrin, for example, in cattle and so forth, to fatten them up or whatever it does. I mean, that's my question. What is it? How do these things
Physiologically?
Yeah.
We have no idea. And I know we have no idea because I knew that you were going to ask that tonight, so I did my web search before I came. There is still no known cause of that increase at this point. Let's expand, though, to in India. We are now splicing in genes into rice capable of producing antibiotics in the rice. It's called yellow rice. In fact, it comes out looking yellow, and we stain it yellow also, so we know. So people in developing nations can actually get vitamins and get antibiotics. There's a question: do you really want to get your antibiotics from an apple or rice? Because if everybody in the neighborhood is eating that rice with that antibiotic, can we anticipate what will happen very shortly to the resistance of that strain? So the pharmaceutical companies go, isn't this a cool genetic idea? Yeah, for a year, probably, right? Because after that, we know what's going to happen, that the pathogens will evolve resistance to it.
Hey, Greg. There was something running around the internet about 2 or 3 months ago, so we know it's true.
Not about me.
Well, no.
Oh.
But it was talking about the evolutionary tree and the fact that some people had
fallen off it?
Well, laterally evolved, if that makes sense, where either certain traits or expressions were being evolved in a lateral move as opposed to a up and down motion. Does that make any sense? Have you heard anything about this?
Yeah, if we assume, and I'm not familiar with the exact article you're talking about, but normally when we do those evolutionary trees, the vertical height on there indicates advancement in complexity. So is all change in genome always produce a more complex organism? No. Ask your local jellyfish. Okay? So ask your local sponge. People have this misunderstanding that evolution is always working towards a goal. First of all, no. Natural selection and therefore evolution is not goal-oriented. It's a roll of the genetic dice. It's nature that says this is the good combination in this environment at this time. So, for instance, and fishes gave rise to amphibians. There are today about 30,000 species of fishes. Well, if fishes gave rise to amphibians, why do we still have fishes? Well, a very small group gave rise to the amphibians. The rest of the fishes spent their time evolving into better what? Better fishes. So same thing here. We don't assume that there's always this ascent up the tree. You can have that lateral, if you will. Let's stay in place, kind of like the Red Queen thing. Let's stay in place, and let's jog in place, and let's get some other developments without complexity. Because, in fact, aren't humans in some aspects becoming less complex? When's the last time you wagged your tail? You still have the vertebrae, right? When's the last time you used your appendix? When's the last time you used your cere? The list goes on, right? So in some cases, we're losing some of the goodies.
Thanks for your talk.
Thank you, folks. Go evolve. We'll see you later.